The marble floors of Henderson Industries gleamed under the afternoon sun, streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows. 43 floors above Manhattan, the executive suite felt more like a monument than a workplace. Everything was pristine, calculated, untouchable. Everything except the man sitting behind the mahogany desk, staring at documents he couldn't bring himself to read. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Marcus Henderson hadn't spoken to another human being in 6 hours, not unusual for a Thursday. His assistant communicated through emails. His driver waited in silence. His meals arrived on silver trays without conversation. At 62, he had built an empire that spoke in quarterly reports and stock prices, but somewhere along the way, he had forgotten how to speak in anything else. The soft sound of a vacuum cleaner hummed from the adjacent conference room. Marcus glanced up from his papers, annoyed by the interruption to his silence. The cleaning crew wasn't supposed to work these floors until after 7. He stood, straightened his tie, and walked toward the sound with the intention of addressing the scheduling error. What he found instead was a woman in her 50s, methodically cleaning each chair around the massive conference table. She moved with quiet efficiency, her graying hair pulled back in a simple bun, her uniform pressed but worn. She wasn't rushing. She wasn't cutting corners. She was treating each surface as if it mattered, as if someone important might sit there tomorrow and deserve a clean space. "Excuse me," Marcus said, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to immediate attention. The woman looked up, startled but not frightened. Her eyes were kind, intelligent, and completely unimpressed by his expensive suit or commanding presence. "Oh, I'm sorry. Am I disturbing you? I can come back later." Her voice carried a slight accent, something European but softened by years of living elsewhere. Marcus found himself pausing, not because of the accent, but because she had asked if she was disturbing him. In his world, people apologized for existing in his presence. She had simply offered a practical solution. "No, it's fine," he said, though he wasn't sure why he said it. "I was just wondering about the schedule. Usually, the cleaning staff comes after hours." She smiled, a genuine expression that seemed to transform her entire face. "I'm covering for my colleague tonight. Her daughter has a school play. Sometimes we adjust our schedules for each other." She paused, studying his expression. "I hope that's acceptable." Marcus nodded, though he realized he had never considered that the people who cleaned his building had families, had lives that required adjustments and compromises. "Of course, I didn't realize that we have lives outside these walls?" She asked gently, without malice or judgment. The directness of her question caught him off guard. Most people danced around conversations with him, measuring every word for its potential impact on their careers or contracts. This woman spoke as if they were equals having a normal conversation. "I suppose I hadn't thought about it," he admitted. She resumed her cleaning, moving to the next chair. "Most people don't. It's not necessarily their fault. When you only see someone for a few minutes in passing, it's easy to forget they exist when you're not looking." Marcus remained in the doorway, watching her work. There was something meditative about her movements, something that made the massive conference room feel less corporate and more human. "How long have you worked here?" 8 years, she replied, running her cloth along the table's edge with careful attention. "I've seen 3 different companies occupy this floor. Watched the markets rise and fall through these windows. Seen executives celebrate and cry in this very room." The honesty in her response surprised him. "And what do you think of it all?" She paused, considering the question seriously. "I think people are people, regardless of what floor they work on. They want to feel important, to make a difference, to go home to someone who cares about their day. The view might be better up here, but the fundamental needs don't change. Marcus found himself leaning against the doorframe, drawn into a conversation, unlike any he'd had in months. "You sound like you've given this some thought. When you clean the same spaces day after day, you have time to observe, to think, to wonder about the lives that unfold in these rooms when you're not here." She moved to the window, cleaning the glass with long, smooth strokes. "Do you ever look out these windows and think about all the people down there? All their stories?" He joined her at the window, looking down at the ant-like figures moving along the sidewalks 43 floors below. "Not really. I usually see traffic patterns and economic indicators." She laughed, a warm sound that seemed out of place in the sterile environment. "I see a woman hurrying to pick up her children from daycare. A man stopping to help an elderly person with their groceries. A couple sharing a hot dog and laughing at something only they understand." Marcus looked at her, then back out the window, trying to see what she saw. "How do you know all that from this distance?" "I don't know," she said, moving to clean another section of glass. "I imagine it. And sometimes imagination is more truthful than facts." The statement hung in the air between them, profound in its simplicity. Marcus realized he hadn't used his imagination for anything beyond financial projections in years. "What's your name?" "Elena Vasquez," she replied, glancing at him with curiosity. "And you're Mr. Henderson, of course." "Marcus," he corrected, surprising himself. He rarely offered his first name to anyone outside his inner circle. "Well, Marcus," she said, testing his name as if deciding whether it suited him, "what brings you to stare out windows on a Thursday afternoon? Shouldn't you be in important meetings or making important decisions?" The question should have felt intrusive, but instead, it felt like genuine interest. When was the last time someone had asked him about his day without wanting something in return? "I was trying to decide whether to attend a dinner tonight," he said, not sure why he was sharing a business obligation. "The kind where everyone says the right things and means nothing." Elena nodded knowingly. "Ah, those dinners. I've cleaned up after many of them. Empty conversations leave empty plates." Her observation was so astute, so perfectly capturing what he had never been able to articulate, that he found himself laughing. Actually laughing, not the polite chuckle he used in board meetings, but genuine amusement. "Exactly," he said. "Empty conversations and empty plates." She finished cleaning the windows and began organizing her supplies. "Well, Marcus, if you decide not to go to your obligatory dinner, what would you do instead?" The question stumped him. He couldn't remember the last time he had chosen how to spend an evening based on what he wanted rather than what was expected. "I honestly don't know." Elena paused in her packing, studying his face with the same attention she had given to cleaning the conference table. "When was the last time you had a real conversation? The kind where you say what you actually think, instead of what you think people want to hear?" Marcus considered the question seriously. "I can't remember." She zipped up her supply bag and slung it over her shoulder. "That's the saddest thing I've heard all day." The simplicity of her statement hit him harder than any business failure ever had. Here was a woman who cleaned office buildings for a living, and she pitied him for his loneliness. The irony wasn't lost on him. "Elena," he said as she moved toward the door, "would you like to have dinner?" She stopped, turned, and looked at him with genuine surprise. "Excuse me? Dinner? Tonight, instead of my business obligation? Would you like to have a real conversation over a real meal?" She studied his face, perhaps looking for signs that this was some kind of joke or test. "You're serious?" "Completely." She set down her supply bag and crossed her arms, not defensively, but thoughtfully. "Marcus, I clean your offices. You run a billion-dollar company. People might find that arrangement unusual." "Let them," he said, surprising himself with the conviction in his voice. I'm tired of caring what people think about arrangements that make no sense anyway. Elena smiled, the same genuine expression that had first caught his attention. In that case, I'd like that very much. But I have one condition. What's that? I choose the restaurant. Somewhere real people eat real food. Marcus nodded, realizing he couldn't remember the last time he had eaten somewhere that wasn't selected by his assistant based on business considerations. Deal. As Elena picked up her supplies again, she paused at the door. Marcus? Yes? Thank you for seeing me. Really? Seeing me. It's been a while since someone looked at me and saw a person instead of a service. After she left, Marcus stood alone in the conference room, looking out at the city below. For the first time in years, he tried to see the individual stories playing out on the streets, the real lives behind the economic data. And for the first time in years, he found himself genuinely excited about the evening ahead. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. He had no idea that the woman who had just agreed to dinner with him held degrees from 3 universities, spoke 7 languages fluently, and had once served as a translator for international diplomats. He didn't know that she had chosen her current profession not out of necessity, but out of a desire to observe humanity in its most unguarded moments. All he knew was that Elena Vasquez had made him feel more human in 20 minutes than he had felt in 20 years. And that, he thought as he gathered his things to leave early for the first time in memory, was worth more than any business deal he had ever closed. The marble floors still gleamed as he walked toward the elevator, but somehow the entire building felt different, warmer, more alive. As if the simple act of truly seeing another person had changed the very air around him. He had no idea how much more was about to change. The cab ride to Brooklyn felt like traveling to another planet. Marcus sat in the back seat, watching familiar Manhattan landmarks give way to neighborhoods he had never seen despite living in the city for decades. Elena had suggested they meet at a small Italian restaurant called Nona's Kitchen, a place she described as where the marinara sauce has stories to tell. Marcus arrived first, standing outside a narrow storefront wedged between a laundromat and a used bookstore. The restaurant's exterior was modest, faded awning, hand-painted sign, and windows that looked like they hadn't been updated since the 1970s. Through the glass, he could see checkered tablecloths, mismatched chairs, and walls covered with family photographs spanning generations. A young man with a flour-dusted apron stepped outside to flip the daily specials board. He glanced at Marcus's tailored suit and polished shoes with mild curiosity, but no recognition. For the first time in years, Marcus stood somewhere as just another person waiting for dinner. Elena appeared around the corner, transformed. Gone was the cleaning uniform, replaced by a simple navy dress and a vintage coat that suggested careful selection rather than casual choice. Her hair fell loose around her shoulders, and she carried herself with a quiet confidence that made Marcus reconsider everything he thought he knew about her. "You found it," she said, approaching with a smile that seemed genuinely pleased rather than politely surprised. "It wasn't difficult," Marcus replied, though he realized the journey had been more than geographical. "You look different," she suggested, amusement dancing in her eyes. "Yourself," he finished, surprising them both with honesty. Elena studied his expression, then nodded toward the restaurant. "Shall we see if Salvatore has a table? He doesn't take reservations, but he remembers faces." They entered into warmth that had nothing to do with temperature. The air carried decades of garlic, basil, and conversation. Salvatore, a robust man in his 70s, emerged from behind the counter, his face lighting up when he saw Elena. "Elena! Bella!" he exclaimed, embracing her warmly before switching effortlessly to rapid Italian. Marcus caught enough words to understand they were discussing family, weather, and something about Salvatore's grandson's soccer game. Elena responded in equally fluent Italian, her voice taking on different rhythms and inflections. She gestured naturally, laughed at Salvatore's jokes, and seemed completely at home in the language. Marcus watched, fascinated by this glimpse of a person he was beginning to realize he had never really seen. Salvatore led them to a corner table, continuing his animated conversation with Elena while occasionally glancing at Marcus with polite curiosity. Finally, Elena switched back to English. "Salvatore, I'd like you to meet my friend Marcus. Marcus, this is Salvatore Romano. His family has owned this place for 47 years. Salvatore extended a work-worn hand. "Any friend of Elena's is family here. She helped my daughter with college applications last year. Smart woman, this one." As Salvatore bustled away to bring them wine on the house, Marcus leaned forward. "College applications?" Elena shrugged, unfolding her napkin. Maria wanted to study international relations, but was struggling with her essays. I helped her organize her thoughts. "You speak Italian fluently." "My grandmother was from Naples. I grew up hearing it at Sunday dinners." She paused, seeming to choose her words carefully. "Languages have always come easily to me." Before Marcus could ask more, Salvatore returned with a bottle of Chianti and began describing the evenings. Specials. Marcus found himself ordering based on enthusiasm rather than familiar ingredients, letting Elena guide him toward dishes he had never heard of. As they waited for their food, Marcus noticed how Elena interacted with the staff. The young waiter practicing his English received patient correction on pronunciation. The busboy, who appeared to be struggling with homework at a back table during his break, got gentle assistance with what looked like mathematics. Each interaction was natural, unforced, as if helping others was simply part of her nature. "You're watching me," Elena observed, pouring wine for both of them. "I'm trying to understand you," Marcus admitted. "This morning I thought I was talking to someone who cleaned my office. Tonight I'm having dinner with someone who seems to know everyone in Brooklyn and speaks better Italian than most tourists." Elena sipped her wine thoughtfully. "What maid? You think cleaning offices precluded speaking Italian?" The question stung because it forced him to confront assumptions he hadn't realized he was making. "I suppose I never considered that people might choose jobs for reasons other than qualification or necessity." "And what do you think my reasons might be?" Marcus studied her face, noting the intelligence in her eyes, the way she chose her words with precision. "I'm beginning to think I have no idea." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of an elderly woman at their table. She spoke rapidly in what sounded like Portuguese, her expression worried. Elena immediately stood, embracing the woman, and responding in the same language with fluency that matched her Italian. Marcus watched as Elena listened intently, asked gentle questions, and seemed to provide comfort through her words. The conversation lasted several minutes, with Elena occasionally placing a reassuring hand on the woman's arm. Finally, the woman smiled, kissed Elena's cheek, and walked away looking visibly relieved. "Mrs. Santos," Elena explained, sitting back. "Down. Her grandson is in the hospital." She was confused about the doctor's instructions and afraid to ask for clarification. "You speak Portuguese too?" "Brazilian Portuguese, yes. Mrs. Santos has been my neighbor for 6 years. When her family calls from São Paulo, I sometimes help translate." Marcus felt something shift in his understanding, like pieces of a puzzle rearranging themselves into a picture he hadn't expected. "How many languages do you speak, Elena?" She paused, her fork halfway to her mouth. "That's an interesting question. Do you mean fluently, conversationally, or well enough to help with homework?" "All of the above." Elena set down her fork and seemed to consider her answer carefully. 7 fluently. 3 well enough for basic conversation. And I can read, but not speak to the other 2. The casual way she delivered this information made Marcus realize she wasn't trying to impress him. If anything, she seemed slightly uncomfortable with the attention her abilities were receiving. "That's extraordinary," he said. "Is it? I think everyone has extraordinary abilities. Most people just never get asked about them." She met his eyes directly. "When was the last time someone asked you about your extraordinary abilities, Marcus?" "I run a company. My abilities are fairly obvious." "Are they?" "Running a company is what you do. I'm asking about who you are when you're not performing the role of CEO." The question created a silence between them that felt profound rather than awkward. Marcus realized he couldn't answer because he no longer knew who he was without his title, his wealth, his corporate identity. "I used to paint," he said finally, the words surprising him as much as they seemed to surprise Elena. "Used?" 20 years ago, maybe 25, landscapes mostly. "I was never very good. What made you stop?" Marcus thought about it, really thought about it, for the first time in decades. "I suppose painting didn't serve any practical purpose. It didn't generate revenue or solve business problems." Elena nodded slowly. "And now, do you miss it?" "I didn't think I did. But sitting here, talking about it, yes, I think I do." Their main courses arrived, and they ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes. Marcus found himself savoring flavors he hadn't experienced in years, food prepared with care rather than for presentation. Around them, the restaurant hummed, with conversation in multiple languages, families celebrating ordinary moments, couples sharing stories across tables that had hosted thousands of similar conversations. "Elena," Marcus said eventually, "why do you clean office buildings?" She smiled, the question seeming to amuse rather than offend her. "Because office buildings are where people spend most of their waking hours. If you want to understand humanity, you study people in their natural habitat." "You study people?" "Constantly. Anthropology was one of my majors." Marcus set down his fork, realizing the evening was full of revelations he wasn't prepared for. "One of your majors?" "I have a tendency to accumulate degrees," Elena said with a self-deprecating laugh. "Curiosity is both a blessing and a curse." As the evening progressed, Marcus found himself sharing stories he hadn't told in years. He talked about his early days building his company, about mistakes that had taught him valuable lessons, about the loneliness of success. Elena listened with the kind of attention that made him feel heard rather than simply tolerated. In return, she shared pieces of her own story. Her childhood moving between countries with diplomatic parents. Her love of languages sparked by a desire to communicate with people, regardless of their background. Her decision to take a job that allowed her to observe human nature in its most unguarded moments. When Salvatore brought them coffee and insisted they try his wife's tiramisu, Marcus realized the evening had become something he hadn't experienced in decades. A genuine connection with another human being. Not a transaction, not a negotiation, but simply two people discovering each other through honest conversation. As they prepared to leave, Elena thanked Salvatore in Italian, promised to return soon, and somehow managed to pay the check before Marcus could object. Outside the restaurant, under the glow of Brooklyn streetlights, they stood facing each other with the awareness that something significant had shifted between them. "Thank you," Marcus said, "for this. For seeing something in me worth having dinner with." Elena smiled. "Thank you for being brave enough to ask. And Marcus, yes, don't stop painting. The world has enough businessmen. It needs more people who see beauty worth capturing." As they parted ways, Marcus realized that Elena Vasquez had managed to accomplish something his therapists, business coaches, and consultants had failed to achieve. She had reminded him that he was human. The following week brought an unusual routine to Marcus Henderson's life. Each evening, instead of working late in his office, he found himself looking forward to 6 p.m. when Elena would arrive for her shift. What had started as accidental encounters became deliberate conversations, brief moments stolen between her cleaning duties and his reluctant departure from the building. Tuesday Evening found them in his office as Elena dusted the bookshelves that lined the walls. Marcus watched her fingers trace the spines of business journals and industry reports, noting how she paused at certain titles. "You can borrow any of them," he offered, surprising himself with the invitation. Elena glanced over her shoulder, a slight smile playing at her lips. "Thank you, but I've read most of these already." The Harvard Business Review piece on emerging markets was particularly insightful, though I disagreed with their analysis of currency stabilization in developing economies. Marcus set down his pen, giving her his full attention. "You disagreed?" "Their model assumed Western economic principles would apply universally, but they failed to account for cultural factors that influence market behavior." Elena moved to dust his desk, speaking with the casual authority of someone well-versed in the subject. "I wrote my thesis on exactly that topic." "Your thesis?" "Graduate school. Economics with a focus on international development." She straightened a stack of papers, her movements efficient but unhurried. "Though that was degree number 3. I have a tendency to follow interesting questions wherever they lead." Marcus leaned back in his chair, studying this woman who continued to surprise him at every turn. "What were the other degrees?" "Linguistics and anthropology for undergraduate. Then economics, then a master's in comparative literature." Elena paused, seeming to consider whether to continue. "And I'm currently working on a PhD in cultural psychology, though that's been on hold for the past year." The casual way she delivered this information left Marcus speechless. Here was a woman with more advanced education than most of his senior executives, cleaning his office because she chose to, not because she had to. "Elena," he said carefully, "why are you telling me this?" She stopped dusting and turned to face him fully. "Because you asked. And because I think you're genuinely curious about the answer, not just making polite conversation." "But why cleaning? With your qualifications, you could what? Sit in a corporate office like this one, analyzing markets from 40 floors above the people those markets actually affect?" Elena's voice carried no judgment, only a kind of patient explanation. "I've done that, Marcus. I spent 3 years as a consultant for international development organizations. I wrote reports about poverty without ever speaking to anyone who was actually poor." She moved to the window, looking out at the city lights beginning to twinkle in the gathering dusk. "Do you know what I learned in those 3 years? That the most important conversations happen in the spaces between official meetings. In elevators, break rooms, after hours when people's guards are down." Marcus joined her at the window, following her gaze to the streets below. "So you became a cleaning lady to conduct anthropological research?" "I became a cleaning lady to remember that human beings are more than economic units or cultural abstractions." Elena's reflection in the glass showed a thoughtful expression. "And to understand how isolation affects people at different levels of society." The word isolation hung between them, carrying weight that felt personal. Marcus found himself wondering if Elena had observed his own isolation, if she had seen through his professional facade to the loneliness underneath. "What have you learned?" he asked quietly. "That loneliness doesn't discriminate based on income or education. That some of the most isolated people I've met work in buildings exactly like this one." She turned from the window to look at him directly. "And that connection, real human connection, is the rarest commodity in corporate America." Their conversation was interrupted by Elena's phone buzzing. She glanced at the screen, and her expression shifted to one of concern. "Excuse me," she said, answering in what sounded like French. "Hola? Oui, je suis là." Marcus listened as Elena conducted what appeared to be a complex conversation, her French fluent and rapid. She switched between reassuring tones and more authoritative ones, clearly working through some kind of problem with the caller. "D'accord, je peux être là dans une heure," she concluded, ending the call with a worried expression. "Everything All right, Marcus asked. My neighbor's daughter. She's a refugee from Haiti. Been in the country for 6 months. Immigration services called for an interview tomorrow morning, but she doesn't understand what documents she needs to bring. Her English isn't strong enough for legal terminology. Elena began gathering her cleaning supplies with increased urgency. I need to go help her prepare. These interviews can determine whether she's allowed to stay in the country. Marcus watched her efficient movements, noting the way she had instantly shifted from philosophical discussion to practical action. Is there anything I can do to help? Elena paused, studying his face as if trying to determine whether his offer was genuine. Actually, yes. Do you know any immigration attorneys? Someone who could provide quick guidance or maybe attend the interview with her? I'll make some calls, Marcus said immediately. What's her name? Marie declared. She's 19, studying to be a nurse. Elena's expression showed both gratitude and surprise. Thank you, Marcus. That's very kind. Give me your number. I'll text you when I have information. As Elena packed up her supplies, Marcus was already scrolling through his contacts. He called 3 different law firms using his name and influence to secure emergency consultation for a young woman he had never met, for no reason other than Elena had asked for help. 20 minutes later, he texted Elena with the name and number of an immigration specialist who had agreed to meet with Marie the following morning pro bono. Elena's response came quickly. You just changed someone's life tonight. Thank you. The next evening, Elena arrived for her shift with news that Marie's interview had gone well, thanks largely to the attorney's guidance. She had been granted temporary protected status and could continue her nursing studies. I owe you dinner, Elena said as she began her work in the conference room where they had first met. You bought dinner last time, Marcus reminded her. Then you owe me dinner. Somewhere you choose this time. Marcus found himself smiling at the easy way she had maneuvered him into another evening together. Are you manipulating me, Elena Vasquez? Constantly, she replied with mock seriousness. I'm conducting an anthropological study on the effects of genuine human interaction on isolated corporate executives. And what are your preliminary findings? Elena paused in her work, considering the question with apparent scientific rigor. Subject shows marked improvement in humor, increased willingness to help others, and demonstrates curiosity about perspectives outside his immediate professional sphere. She met his eyes with a grin. Further research required. Their banter was interrupted by Elena's phone ringing again. This time, she answered in what sounded like German, her voice taking on the precise formal tones of that language. The conversation was brief but intense, ending with what sounded like reassurances. German too? Marcus asked when she hung up. A colleague from graduate school. She's in Berlin, working on her dissertation, and needed help translating some archival documents. Historical German can be tricky. Marcus shook his head in amazement. Is there any language you don't speak? Several, Elena replied seriously. I've always wanted to learn Mandarin, but the tonal aspects are challenging. And my Russian is conversational at best. The casual way she discussed her linguistic limitations made Marcus laugh. Your Russian is conversational at best. I can order food and ask for directions, but I wouldn't trust myself to negotiate a business deal or translate poetry. Elena, do you realize how extraordinary you are? She paused in her work, seeming to consider the question seriously. I think everyone is extraordinary, Marcus. Most people just never get the opportunity to show it. Or they get so focused on one narrow definition of success that they forget about all their other capabilities. The observation felt pointed without being accusatory. Marcus found himself thinking about his own forgotten interests, his abandoned painting, the parts of himself he had sacrificed for corporate achievement. When did you last paint? Elena asked, as if reading his thoughts. I bought supplies last weekend, Marcus admitted. Haven't opened them yet. What's stopping you? I'm not sure I remember how. It's been so long. Elena finished cleaning the conference table and turned to face him. Muscle memory is an interesting thing. Your hands might remember even when your mind doubts. Would you like to see my studio? The invitation surprised him as much as it seemed to surprise her. You have a studio? I have an empty room with good light that I've been calling an office. It could be a studio again. Elena studied his expression, perhaps recognizing the vulnerability in the offer. I'd like that very much. As they made plans for the weekend, Marcus realized that Elena Vasquez had accomplished something remarkable. She had not only made him want to reconnect with forgotten parts of himself, but she had also shown him what genuine curiosity about another person looked like. For the first time in years, he found himself looking forward to discovering not what someone could do for him, but who they actually were. The cleaning supplies sat forgotten as they talked until well past Alana's usual departure time, neither of them in any hurry to end their conversation. Outside the office windows, the city continued its restless motion, but inside, two people had found something increasingly rare in the modern world: authentic human connection, based on mutual respect and genuine interest. Marcus was beginning to understand that Elena's extraordinary linguistic abilities were just the surface of someone whose extraordinary quality lay in her capacity to see and nurture humanity in others. And he was starting to suspect that she had been studying him from the very beginning, not as a subject in an anthropological experiment, but as a person worth knowing. Saturday morning found Marcus standing in his apartment's spare room, paint tubes scattered across a cloth-covered table. Elena arrived carrying coffee from a neighborhood bakery, her presence transforming the sterile space into something alive with possibility. You actually bought everything, she observed, examining the easel and blank canvases. I may have overcompensated, Marcus admitted. Elena laughed, handing him coffee. Start simple. What do you see when you look out that window? Marcus gazed at Central Park below. Traffic. Joggers. The usual chaos. Look deeper. He tried, really. Tried. Gradually details emerged. Morning light catching the lake's surface. An elderly man feeding pigeons with patient dedication. Children chasing each other while parents watched with protective love. I see stories, he said finally. Now paint one. 3 hours of rediscovered joy followed. Marcus's hands remembered more than his mind had dared hope. Elena offered gentle guidance, speaking occasionally in Italian when describing color theory, French when explaining technique. Their afternoon was interrupted by Elena's phone. A family in her building faced eviction over a misunderstood notice they couldn't read. I need to go, Elena said. I'm coming with you, Marcus replied, setting down his brush. They drove to Elena's neighborhood, where Spanish mingled with English on every corner. The Hernandez family lived in a cramped apartment with 3 children. Elena translated while Marcus listened, a landlord exploiting language barriers to force them out. Tell them not to worry, Marcus said quietly. I'll handle this. One call to his lawyer, another to housing advocacy, a third to city government. By evening, the family had legal representation, the eviction was halted, and the landlord faced investigation. How did you do that? Elena asked. Same way you help people. I use the tools I have available. Elena stopped walking, studying his face under a streetlight. You're different than 3 weeks ago. You taught me that being useful doesn't require quarterly reports. No, Marcus. You taught yourself that. I just reminded you that you had the choice. Back at his building, Marcus turned to her. I have a proposition. I want to create a foundation providing legal aid and support to immigrant families. I want you to run it. Why me? Because you speak 7 languages, understand multiple cultures, and see people as individuals rather than problems. He paused. And because you're the only person I trust to do it right. Complete autonomy over operations? Done. And I keep cleaning part-time. It keeps me grounded, Marcus smiled. I wouldn't dream of stopping your research. Elena extended her hand. Partner. 6 months later, Marcus watched Elena conduct staff meetings in 3 languages, coordinating services across the city. On his easel, a half-finished painting captured their first dinners. Brooklyn Street. The Billionaire now measured success in families housed and dreams preserved. The cleaning lady stood at the center of meaningful change. Sometimes, between crises and victories, they remembered when a dinner invitation transformed 2 lives completely. Elena had been right about extraordinary abilities. Everyone had them. They just needed someone to believe those abilities were worth discovering. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.